I use a variety of different technologies all the time. iOS devices, ancient Macintosh setups, ancient PC hardware, slightly less ancient Macintoshes, and when it comes to networking, I have a variety of different airport base stations. This is just one of the many different airports that I have. Not all of them are even connected up to the network at the moment because it's still kind of a work in progress, but obviously, like the title says, we're going to be adding onto the network with some other airports. But first, we need to actually talk about the network itself and how it's going to change. Now, this has the name iTunes Zone because we have the iTunes setup right here. Obviously, it makes sense to have something iTunes related. That way, I actually know what airport is where. Now, obviously, this is on a metal chassis, specifically the G5, but I haven't noticed any impact in its performance at all. In fact, it probably helps out the airport a bit because as this is metal, it can actually dissipate the heat from the airport itself onto the G5. This top portion of the chassis doesn't really get all that hot, so this doesn't overheat or anything. And because of its placement, I can easily access the Ethernet ports to connect the G5 and the Mac Pro up to the internet. And obviously there is more to improve, especially with cable management, but I've been really happy with how it's been working out here. Going to the software side of things real quick, you can see that I have 5 different airports connected up to the network. Now this Mac Pro doesn't have Wi-Fi, but it does have 2 Ethernet jacks. Only one of them is being used at the moment. I'm sure that'll change in the future once I actually set up some more network gear, but for the purposes of today's video, you can see that we do have Ethernet. Obviously, we have the magical internet globe, which indicates that we do have Ethernet, or in this case, just internet in general. I'm just saying Ethernet because that's how the Mac itself is configured. And then going from that directly to this airport, this one acts as the main router for the entire network. And the reason why is because this is the 2013 revision. It has 802.11 AC Wi-Fi, so it's the newest out of all of these here. The rest of them have 802.11n, which is still plenty fast enough. But obviously, considering I have this one, I wanted it to be the main one because it only makes sense. Here we have 2 identical Airport Express models. Now these are from 2008, so they're the newer 802.11n Wi-Fi standard. I do actually have one, if not several, of the 2004 variants, and even though those can still be used, I would much rather only use them with like PowerPC era hardware, not for general Wi-Fi purpose. So because these are newer, they are set up to actually extend the network, hence the names Airport Extend and Airport Extend 2. Now we already talked about iTunes Zone. It's a first generation Airport Extreme, and it's extending the network as well, but I'm also making use of the Ethernet with the Macs here. And the other airports that we have set up is a time capsule. Now I have this named as Airport Time Machine because I only have one time capsule, so I'm not really going to confuse it with another model. And this is actually set up with my Mac Mini to back it up because obviously as a time capsule, it can do time machine, back up the Mac itself. So I am putting it to good use with that. And that is pretty much the extent of the network as a whole. Wow, check it out. An Apple TV. Now these will definitely be a topic for another time, but I really only have this for a comparison here. I really do like these Apple TVs though. But notice anything similar? Pretty cool, huh? We also have an iPad here to help us out because I have Airport Utility installed on this guy, and well, you can see the exact same setup that we just saw on the Mac itself. Here though, we have the newest edition of the Airport Express lineup, and I haven't had these before until now. And not only do I have one, we actually have 2 to set up. And I think that these are really cool because, just look at it. It's pretty much identical to this Apple TV. You can stack them. It's just so cool. It's a shame that they don't make the airports anymore, but I'm going to continue using these, and I can't wait to set these up and actually see them pop up in Airport Utility. I got these with the original Apple power cables. Now, even though it's just a standard figure 8 power cable, it's still really cool to see this because obviously it's an official Apple cable and you can just tell from the design here. What's really cool about this revision of the Airport Express is that if you really wanted to, you could use this as your entire home router. The original Airport Express models could really only extend the network and give you an Ethernet jack, but this thing can actually accept Ethernet and transmit a Wi-Fi signal while also giving you a local access port, which is fantastic. Not to mention that you still have USB, so you can use this with a printer or something like that, and you do also get a headphone output, which is fantastic, especially when it comes to AirPlay. The top, of course, has an Apple logo, and on the front there is an LED just like every other Airport model, and I really do like how compact this is. As you saw, it's pretty much the exact same size and form factor as the second and third generation Apple TV. In fact, if we actually stack it on top of one another, they are identical. Like, this is perfect. And just because we can see a comparison on the back here. Now, obviously the TV has HDMI. As this is an older model, we do have USB, specifically micro USB. We also have optical audio output, and we do have Ethernet on the Apple TV for a wired connection, and the power input is identical. On the bottom, all you have is another Apple logo and a very nice anti-slip coating, which is really awesome, and it's exactly identical on the Apple TV. Now, as you probably saw, the TV itself is a bit scratched up, but these are almost in mint condition. They do have a little bit of wear and tear, but honestly, compared to the TV, this is basically brand new, and I can't wait to put these into service. We're going to start off by actually setting up one of these with the iPad itself, and then we're going to set up the other one with the Mac Pro, just to see the iOS and the macOS side of things. Over here at the Y2K setup, we have the iPad on iOS 6, we have one of the airports that will be set up with the iPad, and we have the other one off to the side here just off frame, and we also have a SIM eject tool to help us with resetting this because this has a recessed button at the back here to reset the entire unit. It's right above the headphone jack, and all we have to do is press the button until the LED at the front here starts blinking. So with one hand, I'm going to try and reset it. Now we just have to actually apply power. And those relays were the G5 that's underneath the desk here. And as you can see, we have blinking LEDs. It seems like the reset switch did its job. And momentarily, once this actually, powers up, it should appear here as a Wi-Fi base station. Obviously, because it's an Apple device, it's integrated within iOS. And this is old enough where it should actually work with iOS 6 no problem. And there it is. It has appeared within settings, and it's just so cool to actually still see iOS 6 usable even after all this time. And it does make sense because, of course, this is from 2012, just like iOS 6. It still just works. It still sees it as an airport. It can still set up the airport. All we have to do now is actually click on it and start the setup process. What's awesome about this is that even though it doesn't have the updated icon for the 2013 airport, it still recognizes it, and it still sees that it's the main airport in the network. We do actually have the icon for the Express here, and it also shows up with the recommended option, which is exactly what I was going to do anyways, which is extend the network. As for the name, we will actually change this to another custom naming scheme, kind of like how I did with Airport Extend and the other airports, but this time it's going to be a little different from those. Because of the design of the airport here, I'm going with the name Airport Satellite because this, and really just the Apple TV form factor in general, still has a very futuristic, clean, modern appearance, despite it being over a decade old at this point, and I think it goes really well with the space theme that I have. And just like that, iOS 6 from 2012 was able to set up the airport here. As you can see, we have a green LED, and to complete the setup, let's actually see it on the network itself. So for some reason, one of the airports decided to extend to iTunes Zone, but whatever. Here we actually have Airport Satellite, so it's officially now on the network. Airport Utility can see it. Well, what do you know? We actually have a notification here. It looks like we do actually have an update available. We could do this directly on the iPad itself. Now this is awesome. We have the classic iOS 6 update screen here, and let me just mention that when it comes to iOS devices and, stuff like this iPhone here, I don't update them. I try to save SHSH blobs so I can actually downgrade them, at least if it's applicable, and in general I really just don't update them or restore them unless I know that it's already on the maximum latest officially supported version. But when it comes to the airports, well, you can freely select older versions right here. And because they're right here, I can easily downgrade if I want to. So that means I'm free to upgrade. There's really no downside because it just ensures that this is up to date with the latest in, airport technologies. And if I really do need to downgrade, it's right here built into the app itself. So while we are still on iOS 6, we can click on download and install the firmware. And just like that, this ancient and obsolete equipment is still perfectly usable even today. Now that we have the first airport satellite set up, it's time to move on to the second one with the Mac Pro. Airport Utility on the Mac here reports it, the way it used to be. I'm not exactly sure why the iPad itself decided to do whatever this is, but regardless, everything is on the network. So what we're going to do is we're going to reset this. And with power applied with the reset button, once it starts blinking, it should appear right here in Airport Utility. Even though the airport itself is ready to be reset, it was actually not detected by the Mac, most likely because it doesn't have a built-in Wi-Fi card. So to double check, I opened up the iPad just to see if it actually detects it, and it is actually showing up on the network. So what I did is I temporarily hooked this up to the Mac with the second Ethernet port, and now it actually shows up. As you can see, it says there is another Wi-Fi device available. So it looks like if I try to actually go through the Mac itself in terms of the Ethernet cable, well, if I just try to add it to an existing network this way, it says that no base stations were found. So let's reconnect the cable up to another airport that actually has internet and try again. So now it's connected up to the iTunes Zone airport and it has shown up again. Now that is what we want because now it's actually going to extend the network, and most importantly, it actually shows up with the network. The setup is complete, and this time it says that it's using Ethernet. Now that doesn't really surprise me because that's the way we connected it up in the first place. If it doesn't wirelessly extend to the network though without the cable, then I'll just reconfigure it. But for the sake of the video, we saw how we can actually set it up with iOS and macOS. Just like the first one, the second one also has a notification here, most likely for a firmware update. In fact, the entire process here could not be more similar than the other one because this is also running version 7.8 of the firmware, and obviously there's an update for 7.8.1. And as you can see, it is downloading the firmware, which was instantaneous, and with the updated firmware, it is now restarting. The moment I disconnect it from Ethernet, it goes offline. But while we do have it set up like this, you can see that the dots within Airport Utility represents that these are connected wirelessly, and the solid line indicates that this is connected through Ethernet directly up to the iTunes Zone. I set up the airport with the iPad to wirelessly extend the network, so as you can see, it is still operational even with Ethernet unplugged. And if you take a look at Airport Utility, now that is one setup. We have 7 different airports all working together, and I still have more to actually set up, which is pretty crazy to think about because 7 different airports on one network. I don't think I'll have any issues with internet now. Now that is awesome. Just like the digital version in Airport Utility, here they are side by side, completely operational, and they still look fantastic to this day. They go really well with the Y2K setup here. What's also awesome about these is that because they are a year older than the 2013 model, they actually show up in this older version of Airport Utility, which is on the G5. And even though these haven't been sold by Apple for quite a while, at least we can pretend that these are still the latest and greatest with this older version of Mac Tracker. See? How can they be old when it hasn't been discontinued yet? And to wrap up today's video, we can take a quick look at Mac Tracker here to see the technical specs of these airports because they are still fantastic even today. Now obviously there have been many improvements in Wi-Fi technology since then, but I don't care. These are airports, they have always worked well for me, and I'm going to continue using them because look at it. It's on my G5, natively supported. How awesome is that? These were initially introduced in June of 2012, obviously not discontinued, but if you take a look at a newer version of Mac Tracker, it says that they were discontinued in April of 2018 when they stopped airport production. Model number is A1392 and they were sold for $99. And clearly they are still supported because it has the green indicator. As for the size, it's basically the equivalent, as we saw earlier, of the Apple TV second and third generation. These go up to 300 megabits per second, and they have 802.11n Wi-Fi with simultaneous 2.4 and 5 gigahertz bands, supported protocols, WPA2, all that fancy stuff. These do have AirPlay, and I believe that these can also support AirPlay 2. So if you use that, that's a nice feature to have. It doesn't have power over Ethernet, obviously no built-in storage, but as we saw earlier, it has a wide variety of connections for a device of this size. And in the history tag, it's pretty much what we talked about, except that we do have a nice image of the airport. And with that, we saw pretty much everything there is to see about the Airport Express second generation. Not only did we set up the airports with both iOS and macOS, but we also learned a bit more about the history side of things, and I still can't believe that these are over a decade old. I mean, the cinema display and the Power Mac are both 20 years old or over at this point, and yet I still get fantastic use out of them. Those airports are no exception, and just like the iTunes Zone, these satellites will find a new awesome home, and they will just continue to work as they were intended to be used, and I can still use my G5 to actually check the status of them. If you enjoyed today's video of actually using old equipment and still getting some use out of it, then consider leaving a thumbs up. And if you want to see more of it in the future, then consider subscribing. But with that, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.